Have you ever wondered what the difference is between your ordinary ho hum business book that gets forgotten and one that makes a lasting impact? In this episode of the Author Switch podcast, I'm going to be talking about books that leave a legacy.
Are you an entrepreneur, small business owner, or consultant looking to boost your authority, influence, and impact? The Author Switch podcast with best-selling, award-winning author Carma Spence is your answer. Tune in for actionable advice, powerful strategies, and engaging interviews to turn on your author switch and take your business to the next dimension.
The Author Switch.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Switch podcast. My name is Carma Spence, and I help executive coaches, business leaders, and consultants write, publish, and market client attracting books so that they can grow their businesses. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about legacy. Your book can not only attract clients, but it can also leave a legacy. And that's what this episode is going to be about. What kind of client attracting book can also leave a legacy? So, first, let's take a look at what a legacy book is to begin with. A legacy book is something that leaves a lasting impact. It continues to inspire long past what some might consider its sell by date. So, for example, Think and Grow Rich. That was written in its time, and it was probably intended to be a book of its time because it used interviews with all the modern people of its time. But today, it is still inspiring new people. And with every generation, new people discover this book and are inspired. So, despite the fact that it is rooted in its time, it has left a lasting impact because of its universal principles. Well, your book could do that too if you write it the right way. So, there are different kinds of legacy books. I'm going to go over these basic types so that we can move forward into getting more practical tips. The first one is what I call a thought leadership book. This is a book that the author basically writes in order to establish their thought leadership. And the interesting thing is, some thought leadership books weren't intended to be thought leadership books. Often the author is just writing their unique perspective. And their unique perspective happens to go against the grain or common knowledge of what is in their industry. So, for example, Seth Godin tends to write thought leadership books. I'm not 100% certain that's his intention. It may be. I haven't really dug into that. But a lot of authors do write with that intention. So, for example, Start With Why by Simon Sinek or Good to Great by Jim Collins. Those are thought leadership books. They were intended to be thought leadership books. And they do showcase the author's unique spin on the topic. The next type of legacy book is an educational or how to book. Now, this one's a little bit harder to create a legacy book with it because sometimes your how to's are dated. So, for example, if you had written a book on how to use MySpace, probably not a legacy book because MySpace doesn't exist anymore. However, there are how-to books that do have a lasting universal underpinning, such as Think and Grow Rich, which has some how-to in it that still is applicable today. But the purpose of an educational or how-to book is to share knowledge or frameworks so that people can have the same results that you've achieved. Now, if you're able to do this with something that's universal, that's based on principles rather than actualities, then you have the potential of having an educational or how to book that becomes also a legacy book. Another example would be Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. This book is based on universal principles. How do highly effective people in principle behave? What are their habits? And these are habits that people 50 years from now can still use to become highly effective. They aren't based in, well, you need to have lived in 1990, whatever, or 2000, or whenever the book was published. It wasn't limited in time because it was principle based. The next type of legacy book is either a memoir or a biography. Now, first, let me just tell you what the difference is. A biography is usually chronological and says, I did this, and then I did that, and I did the other thing. And it often covers the entire life of someone. Biography is written by someone else about that person. So, for example, Elon Musk has a lot of books out there about him. He didn't write any of them, those are biographies. An autobiography is a biography that one writes about oneself. A memoir is less, it's not that it's less factual, but it's more of a narrative, a story, and it usually focuses in on one theme or piece of someone's life. So, for example, if I were to write a memoir, I might write a memoir about growing up in Africa. That's a very small part of my life. It only covers about 2.5 years, but it had profound impacts on the rest of my life. That would be a memoir because it would be about a very specific small piece. The next type of book is a business case study or model type book. And what this does is it showcases real world examples or proprietary business models that stand as a blueprint for success. These books provide reference for future leaders to apply in changing markets. Again, if these are principle based and not based on actual strategies that depend on things existing right now, it has the opportunity to become a legacy book. A good example might be Blue Ocean Strategy by W. Chan Kim and Renee Mauborgne. I don't know how to pronounce that name. I hope I didn't mangle it too much. But that introduces a business model that continues to influence entrepreneurs and business leaders today. Okay, it hasn't been 50 years yet, but given that it's more principle based, I highly suspect that that will become a legacy book. And the last type of legacy book is what's called a philosophical or visionary work. This presents a long term vision or mission that aligns to future trends and helps guide professionals into the future. These books aim to be relevant for the next 10 to 20 years, but sometimes they last longer. The Lean Startup by Eric Ries is an example. It introduces a forward thinking business concept that can be adapted over time. And given how it's written, it's very possible it'll become a legacy book. And honestly, a legacy book can have a limited shelf life. The point of a legacy book is that it leaves a legacy usually beyond the lifetime of the author, at least a few decades. The ones that are really amazing are like, and here's the thing, you can aim for a legacy book and then miss the mark because life, the world changes and it no longer applies. But if you focus in on being universal and principle based, your book has a much better chance of becoming a legacy book. And in most cases, most people write legacy books not because they're trying to change the world or leave a legacy for the industry for eons. They're usually trying to leave something for their grandchildren, and that works too. Now, a legacy book isn't just about immediate sales or even short term success. It's about creating something that can continue to influence, educate, or guide future generations. And after the break, I'm going to be talking about some practical things you can do. I mean, I've hinted at them in this half, but in the next half after the break, I'm going to be giving you practical things that you can do to give your book a chance of being a legacy book and influencing future generations.
The future of entrepreneurial book writing has arrived. In an age where information moves at the speed of light and innovation is a business requirement, one book stands as the North Star for the authors of tomorrow. In You Can Make It to the Finish Line, Carma Spence decodes the mysteries of writing a book that markets your business. offering a blueprint to navigate the frontiers of writing, editing, and publishing. With accessible techniques and visionary insight, this guide propels you forward so that your expertise can transform into impact. Step into your future, transform your vision into a legacy. You can make it to the finish line, where your author's journey meets the future. Available now on Amazon.
Hello, and welcome back to the Author Switch podcast. My name is Carma Spence, and I help executive coaches, business leaders, and consultants write, publish, and market client attracting books that grow their businesses. In the first half, before the break, I talked about, in general terms, what a legacy book is, and I mentioned the different types of legacy book, which include the thought leadership book, the educational or how to book, the memoir or biography, a case study or model, and a philosophical or visionary work. Now I'm going to go into much more practical advice on how you can give your book the chance of leaving a legacy. So, the first point is really about thought leadership. Choose your message carefully. You want to consider the impact that the message of your book is going to have on future business conversations, and you want it to position you as an expert in your field. Think about what it is that you want to include. Is it something that's going to have short term shelf life, or does it have the potential of impacting generations to come? So, for example, Blue Ocean Strategy wasn't just about something that is relevant today, it has impact well into the future. Tip number two, identify evergreen topics. By selecting a topic that has the potential of being something that's universal and evergreen, you have a greater chance of having a legacy. For example, I just wrote 4 books this year so far. And the first one was It All Starts with an Idea. That potentially could be a legacy book because what I talk about in it are strategies that aren't dependent on any technology today. They are principle based that will help you choose an idea for a client attracting book. And I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to do that 50 years from now using the information in that book. Tip number 3, write with clarity and simplicity. That means you want to make sure that what you're writing is easy to understand and not full of jargon. You want it to be using plain, easy to understand English. If you can run it through something like Hemingway so that it has like a 6th grade understanding. Now, understand, okay, when I first started writing, your average reader level was 8th grade, which I find very depressing, but there it is. Since then, now I've been in the marketing world for 30 years, that average reading understanding has dropped to 6th grade, sometimes even lower. I found it challenging enough to write some of the content that I write for an 8th grade audience, especially when I was writing about science. Now we're trying to aim for a 6th grade understanding. I understand the limitations there. Do the best you can. Sometimes you'll have to write some of the content at that level, and sometimes you'll have to go beyond that just because the concept that you're trying to explain requires more. But do what you can. Try to speak to as low a reading level as you can while still maintaining the integrity of the information that you're giving. Hemingway is a very good tool for doing that. You can also ask Chat, Claude, Gemini to go through your content and dumb it down to a lower reading level. So, again, the tips are avoid jargon, avoid current trends, leave that stuff out because that's not universal. Focus on clear, direct language that won't feel dated. So, no slang, no modern slang. And write like you're teaching, not like you're trying to impress your audience. This increases accessibility. Tip number 4. That's the power of case studies. When you can use a case study that you have had either in your own life or with a client that illustrates the points. In fact, in some cases, you can even use fictional stories. The point is you're trying to tell the information that you're attempting to impart in a story format. Now, I've recently come across these videos on a YouTube channel called Mr. Ballin. He tells stories of the strange and bizarre, like crime stories and things like that, but he tells them in a story format. I highly recommend watching his videos just for the feel of rhythm of storytelling, but beware, his content is addictive. I find myself watching them way too often, and they're often a half an hour long. But I also think that the way he's able to tell stories about these things that happened in real life in an engaging way that don't sound like he's telling some fireside chat story. He tells the story in a way like if I was talking to you about something that happened in life. He does it very engagingly. I highly recommend checking out a couple of his videos because I think it can teach you a lot about storytelling. Tip number 5, leverage your unique framework. For example, in the book I just talked about, it all starts with an idea. I have a framework that I use called the MSV, which stands for Mindstorm, Sift, Validate. You use these 3 steps, out comes an idea that is validated and more than likely attractive to your audience. It is a framework. If you have such a framework, leverage it because this will be something that makes your book stand out. It's unique to you. And as long as your framework is also based on principles, again, I keep coming back to principles, then it has a greater chance of building a legacy because it won't matter if someone reading it is happening right now in the 2020s or if they're now in year 3000, it will still apply. Tip number 6, that is storytelling. Again, whereas case studies is using things that actually happened in real life, storytelling can use stuff that happened in real life. It can use fiction, but it also is just a way of framing things so that it is engaging. Our minds, our brains are hardwired for story. I'm going to drop in the show notes a link to this book, Think and Grow Rich, which is quite a bit older. It's all about storytelling and the history of storytelling and how we are hardwired for story. It's a very good read. It will give you some really good ideas on how to build stories into your content. The more storytelling that comes into your content, the more engaging it is because we are hardwired to listen to story. We've been telling stories ever since we lived in caves and painted them on walls. We love stories. Here's an example of story. Do you see this painting right here? You may not be able to read what it says, but it says, if you don't inspire, you expire. Stories inspire so that your content doesn't expire. But that painting, which I generated with AI, I love the fact that I've been wanting to create that image for decades, but I'm not an artist, so I couldn't do it. And finally, AI got to the point where it could create the image that I wanted. But it's based on a dream I had many, many years ago. I was in college, undergrad, and I dreamt that I was walking down the stairs of a darkened castle and firelight was glimmering on the sides of the walls. And as I walked down, Frankenstein's monster, who didn't really look like Frankenstein's monster, he looked more like this dude. He was tall and slender. In fact, his face reminded me a lot of Terrence Stamp. And he looked at me and he asked, if you don't inspire, you expire, right? Now, in the context of the dream, he wanted to go upstairs and strangle someone so they died. If you don't breathe, you die. But when I woke up, I thought, wow, that's deep. If you don't inspire, you expire. If your content doesn't inspire some emotional response, it is easily forgotten. There's a story. Were you intrigued? Did you want to know what happened next? That's how you tell your content. Again, check out Mr. Ballin. And there are a lot of other storytell channels. That's just the one I thought. What I like about his and why I'm recommending his is because they feel very everyday. They feel like a conversation. They feel like he's just saying, hey, you know what I heard about the other day? Da, 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 da. And he tells a story. That is a very powerful way to tell a story. And it's very engaging. So, again, I'll drop a link to his channel in my show notes. And finally, tip number 7. That is layering in practical solutions that have a lasting impact. This means you want to include actionable insights. You don't want to just tell stories to tell stories. For example, the story I just told about this guy. You can use the information from that story. Now you know that when you write something, you need to create an emotional resonance, an emotional response, or your book will be forgotten. That's something that's actionable. And I'm in this video, I'm giving you ideas of where you can go to find information on how to make your book inspiring. Things that make your book inspiring include your personal story, the stories of your clients, the stories of how your framework was created, your origin story. Those are the kind of stories. Now, to make that practical, so now you take that story and you go, here are the lessons that were in that story and how you can implement those lessons in your life, in your business, whoever your ideal client is. I highly recommend including practical takeaways in your book. When your takeaways are practical, especially if they are, hear it again, principle based. I feel like I'm Svengoolie saying Perry Mason. Okay, there we go. Practical, principle based solutions. So, for example, in Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill gave practical advice that we can implement today. There were actionable insights and advice in that. He talked about masterminds. People are still using masterminds, and they're often basing it on the information that he provided in that book. So, if you can provide actionable, principle based insights, your book has a greater chance of becoming a legacy book. So, to sum it all up, first half, I talked about the different types of books that you can write. In this half, I talked about practical things you can do to make sure your book is a legacy book. That would include identifying evergreen topics, principle based content, writing with clarity and simplicity, using case studies and stories, using your unique framework, and providing practical principle based solutions. I hope you found this content useful, and I will be back next week with the next episode of the Author Switch podcast. This is Carma Spence saying ciao for now. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Author Switch podcast. If you enjoyed today's show and want to support its mission, here's how to help. First, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your engagement helps my channel grow and reach more aspiring and established authors. Your ratings and reviews are invaluable. They help me reach more listeners and continue delivering top-notch content. To catch up on past episodes, including those no longer available on podcast platforms, visit authorswitch.com/episodes. There, you can choose to watch or listen to your favorite episodes at your convenience. If you'd like to show additional support, consider dropping a tip in the tip jar at buymeacoffee.com/Carma Spence. Your contributions help keep the podcast running and are greatly appreciated. Thank you for being a part of the Author Switch community. Until next time, keep writing.